Hi everyone, it's me, Tim, and today I want to talk to you about implementing Endgame slides. I know I've talked about slides before, and in a way this is going to be a companion video to the one I did last month on how to do the beginning of video games. But end slides are something that I've done in a lot of my games, starting with Fallout. My games are kind of known for having choice and consequence, called C&C, which, just a side note, C&C used to refer to the game Command and Conquer. And for a brief period in the 90s, the C&C Music Factory, that song, I Got the Power, very popular in that Simpsons episode where Homer thinks Bart's gay. Anyway, it was a really funny period of time where people started talking about the C&C in my games, and I had no idea what they were talking about because C&C was already a well-used acronym. Anyway, so choice and consequence. Basically, it means in my games you usually have many choices you can make, and a lot of those have consequences that happen during the game. Some happen right away. Some happen during the game, but a few of them have very long-term consequences. And one of the things that we wanted to do ever since back in Fallout was replayability of our games. We put so much choice in the game that there's no way you can experience all the content in one playthrough. You just can't. I mean, if you kill someone, you're not going to talk to him. If you rescue Tandy, she's not going to get killed by the raiders. So it's just real choice and consequence usually means you have to replay the game. Because of that, I wanted the game to show what the long-term consequences of your choices were. And that led to us putting in slides. And the slides worked out really well in Fallout, and we had such a good time doing it. For Arcanum, we tried to make even more. We did it also on Temple. We did it to some extent on Vampire. And then we brought it back for Outer Worlds. I want to talk to you about how we implemented them and how some things were easier than we thought and other things were tougher. Basically, these slides are implemented by using a set of tracking variables. As the game is played, we record decisions the player makes. Now, some of those tracking variables are specific for slides, but you would be surprised how many variables already exist to do other things. So you don't really need to make new variables just to use for slides. For example, while the player is playing the game, they're doing quests, and some of them they're completing, and that gets stored. Some of them they fail, that gets stored. There are also frequently narrative designers store variables to remember what path the player took in the dialogue, or variables are used to record what achievements that the player got while they were playing the game. So in addition, the end slides, in addition to looking at particular variables that are stored for the purpose of the end slides to look at, they can also look at what quest you finished or what quest you failed, what achievements you got, some of the things you may have said in dialogue, whether or not certain NPCs are dead, what the ones that are living, what their reaction state to the player is, and also what factions have certain reactions to. So you can look up, like, does this faction love the player or vilify the player? Those kind of things. I mean, you'd be surprised when you go and look at the game state data, what's saved away in a save game, how many end slides you could make just based on that data alone. So what we always did is we made a bunch of end slides based on that entire set of data, the specific tracking data, but then all the other things as well. And it turned out quickly that these end slides were extraordinarily dependent on the narrative designers. So you really have to get them on board with wanting to do this, because they're the ones that are ultimately going to know all the big decisions and choice points that the player's going to make throughout the story. And any of them that can't be tracked via quest or achievement or any of the other variables are going to need specific slide variables, or basically global variables that are used only by the slide show at the end. And the reason these slides are going to be super dependent on your narrative designers are they're going to have to be responsible for tracking all those important events. They're going to have to be responsible for making sure that they have slides for all those events. And that may seem simple, but a lot of those slides you're going to have to be very careful about overlapping or interdependent events. For example, you may have a slide if you kill person A and person B becomes the ruler, you want a slide for that. But if you kill person B and person A becomes the ruler, you want a slide for that. But what if you don't kill either of them? Who becomes the ruler then? What if you kill both of them? Who becomes the ruler then? Just right there, you have 4 potential slides you're going to have to make. Maybe there's a co-ruling side where A and B roll together or get married or whatever. And then if you kill both of them, maybe it causes an uproar in the kingdom. So you need slides for all this, and you need to make sure that your narrative designers are tracking these things. One thing that happened in several of my games and people discovered this when they went to mod them later, is the logic wasn't correct in the slides. And either a slide showed up when it shouldn't have, or the slide just didn't show up. And I talked about this when I said designers did a lot of QAing of the game at the end, because they were the ones who had to look to see if the game was doing what people wanted. QA can only tell you if the game seems to do something strange or buggy. They can tell you that it seems to be an error. They can't always catch, hey, the game did this, but the design said it should do this. The designers are the best ones to catch that. Similarly, if you see a slide appear and you didn't do anything to make it happen, you can report that and go, I don't understand why this slide came up about, A and B ruling together because I killed both A and B. But if a slide doesn't appear that was supposed to, if you're not the narrative designer in charge of that, you had no idea that slide was supposed to appear. So there's no bug to enter. It wasn't, hey, I killed A and B and it didn't say anything about it. It was, you did a lot of things it doesn't say about. You don't know that's a bug. So a big problem we've run into on end slides is the narrative designers really have to own and track that system. Now, there is some dependency in end slides on art because, they're pieces of art and somebody has to make them. But since they're usually unanimated slides, sometimes done in 2D, but sometimes you can just use screenshots from the game. You could take a picture of a town and a screenshot of a town and say, this town thrived. You could take a picture of that town when it's being attacked by bandits or when it's burning or on fire or something and saying, this town didn't survive. And it's perfectly fine. And players are more interested in what the narrator is saying than particularly what's on the slide, as long as the slide supports it. So we found that the slides themselves weren't that big of a generation cost. It was bigger for the narrative people. Now, because of all these dependencies, despite me wanting a lot of end slides, my games have literally varied on how many end slides they've had, how many conditions we caught, how many different slides we end up showing. Now, believe me when I tell you, the goal is always to have as many as possible. Because it's very disappointing when you did something that you thought was important, and then the game doesn't recognize it at the end. The whole point of CNC is to have the game recognize at some point all the major decisions you made. Turns out, by necessity, end slides kind of have to come last. You have to have all those quests in place. You have to have those NPCs in place. And they have to be debugged, because if you spend time making end slides and then take out a quest or remove an entire area, which means you may lose some NPCs, then you've made a lot of stuff for nothing. So because of that, end slides tend to be made at the very end of game development. Well, the other two big things that happen at the end of game development are bug fixing and optimization. And those things always take priority over the end slides. So while it's true that your narrative designers and your artists tend to have the most free time towards the end, it's the programmers and QA that are super busy right at the end of a game. Sometimes you just can't spare the resources to implement the end slides. So my games have always had a varying amount of end slides, and trust me when I say I always wanted more, but I'm usually happy with what I got. If you are planning to make end slides yourself, what I would do is, as you're making the game, every single choice point Ask yourself, is this something that's going to show a consequence right away or at some point later in the game? And if yes, great. If not, ask yourself, is this something that's going to have a long-term effect that's pretty major? And if so, write down what the different slides are, your need for that choice point, and move on. That way, when you get to the end of the game, you'll have this list of slides you want to show. You can decide how many of those can already be determined from variables you already have. And then the few that don't, you need to go into a dialogue or a script and set that variable so you know that the player made that particular choice, and then you can have that slide come up. This is something that in Fallout, we scrambled to do it at the end. And then in Arcanum and Temple and Vampire, we thought ahead on. And for Outer Worlds, we thought of it right from the very beginning. We were paying attention to things like that. Anyway, I hope this helps you implement endgame slides, and I hope you think of them as a nice bookend to how you choose to begin your game.